Hello.
Hello, Francis. Hi. How are you?
How are you? Oh, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm fine, thanks. A bit
Good.
colder than I'd like to be, but fine.
Yeah, I know. I thought spring was coming. It keeps sort of coming and then it goes back to being
It
freezing,
does.
doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Can't make its mind up. Fairly typically.
Of course, we are in the UK. What can you expect?
Absolutely. Yes. We have a couple of sunny days, and everybody thinks summer's arrived.
I know, I
Yeah.
know. I made that mistake 2 years ago. I sowed all my seeds in February when it was just like summer. It
Yeah.
was, yeah, and then it got freezing and everything.
Yeah.
Didn't germinate. So I'm being really cautious this year. I'm just
Yeah,
waiting until it's actually spring.
I think that's wiser, isn't it? Yeah.
Mhm.
Just hold your horses and just see what's going to happen next. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. Shall I kick off?
Yes,
Yeah. Our
yeah.
first
Are you
question.
recording? Okay, cool. So
Yeah.
are we doing it like you'll ask the questions and then I'll just respond to
Think
them?
so. Is that, yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
perfect.
we want. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Right. So the first one is from Julie, and she says, when is the best time to deadhead hydrangeas, and do I need to do anything else with them for the forthcoming season?
Okay, well, the best time to deadhead hydrangeas is end of the winter, early spring. And it's a very careful operation because the next two buds, you'll see them really clearly opposite each other on the stem below, are this year's flowers. So only chop down to just above those really big swollen buds and no further, unless you're formatively pruning. You can also prune around now
Yes.
if you want to reshape the hydrangea, take it right down if you want to, and they'll recover from that quite well. The only exception to that is the climbing hydrangea, which you'll prune immediately after it's flowered in the summer. So if it's climbing, don't do anything now. If it's a shrub hydrangea of any kind, prune it now. And then also a healthy kind of feed is good because they're quite hungry plants. So some manure around the base, compost
Yes.
even, and plenty of water all through
Yeah.
the season, especially if we have a dry season.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Hopefully outside they should be fine, but if we have
Yes.
a very dry season, they
Well,
may need a
last
bit.
spring was very dry, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, but that
yeah,
mulch will really help. So you've
absolutely.
obviously got blended farming, manure and soil conditioner and things like that, which would be brilliant for that.
Yeah, anything like that would be perfect just to give it a bit of extra boost. And applying that now is the perfect time to do
Yeah,
it.
yeah. A good job for a cold day.
Yes.
The next one is I don't consider myself to be green fingered at all. I would love to know what plants I could use to cover the ground in my garden borders. A lot of the plants and trees we have grown high off the ground. Any help appreciated?
Okay, so I'm guessing this is quite a shady area.
It sounds,
And bare soil, which is a common problem where you have taller shrubs and trees. It's a tough place for plants to grow because there's a lot of competition for light, but also for moisture. I think people often underestimate how much moisture a tree or a shrub will take up in a day.
yeah,
So you need some tough plants to go underneath them, but there are loads that will do it. So even things like ivies will scramble along the ground really nicely and add a bit of interest. But there are plants like gallium is something I often use in these kinds of situations, which forms a lovely delicate carpet underneath and some white flowers. But looking for anything woodlandy, so wood anemones, bluebells, things like that should do really nicely in those
yeah,
sorts of conditions.
yeah.
Wild garlic, if you dare, although it will spread, but
Take
you can
care.
use it,
Yeah,
as a useful
exactly.
plant. So, if you're into kind of produce, then wild garlic is a really good one.
Yeah,
But there are loads of other things. So Pachysandra terminalis is the classic ground cover plant for where nothing else will grow, and it's hard to beat. So if you're really struggling with everything else, go for that one. Otherwise, things like periwinkles, Vinca minor is really pretty with little blue or white flowers. So if you want a little bit of more color, that would be good. So yeah, there's lots of choice,
yeah,
but it is a tough spot. So just try, I would say, buy a few different things, try them out, see which ones do well, and if something naturally dies off, don't try again with that. It's obviously too tough for it, but buy more of the things that do really well. That's always a good
yeah,
way. And also looking at your neighbours, if they have any shady areas, what's growing well in your neighbours' gardens,
yeah.
because the soil type will probably be very similar.
Right. Well, we have, I mean, we've got a good selection of the things you've mentioned, things like Vinca and Pachysandra and bulbs. You mentioned a lot of bulbs, and bulbs will often cope quite well with that. So again, we've still got
Absolutely.
snowdrops and things left, and those
Yeah.
will usually cope okay under there, won't they?
and it's great that she's thinking about that, because ground cover plants aren't the most glamorous. Then, you know, when you go to a nursery, you tend to want to buy things that are really bright and flowery, but actually they're really essential for wildlife. Loads of beetles and things that don't fly really need that ground cover to survive, and they'll eat your pests that will attack other plants and save you, you know, spending any money on pest control. So it's a really important thing to remember, to get some good ground cover. So it's great that she's thinking about it.
And less weeding, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And less mulching, you know, you keep the moisture in as well. There's a lot to be said for ground cover.
Yeah. So the next one is something perhaps it's a bit premature, but when is the best time and where to plant summer bedding to get the most out of them this year?
Okay. I suppose it is quite premature unless you're growing it yourself from seed, in which case you'd probably want to start sowing some of those seeds fairly soon. The best thing, I always think, if you have it, is to put them in a polytunnel or greenhouse to really grow them on strongly now. So you can buy little cells of bedding probably fairly soon, in the next couple of, you'll know this exactly when it's coming in to the nurseries, but you know, when you can see them in the shops, plugs of things like petunias, any summer bedding, buy them in plugs. You'll save yourself a bit of money, pelargoniums as well, and then take them home if you have a greenhouse and pop them up into a slightly larger pot and grow them on in your greenhouse. And then as soon as the frost risk is entirely over, so like May or June, even sometimes in different parts of the country, harden them off and then plant them out, especially to get the most of them, plant them into a lovely kind of rich compost if you can, so in a hanging basket or something. The more fertilizer they have, the better they will perform. The nice thing about bedding is that it does always flower, even if you don't do anything to it, because it only has one chance and then it dies. So you will get flower, but the more food and the more water and the more nutrients it has, the better it will perform for you. So buy them as soon as you see them, grow them on nice and warm, and then wait till it's absolutely no risk of frost before you start to harden them off and then put them out. So I would say by end of June they'll be out in the beds.
Right. So we have, like you say, got a few in. We've got little baby plants, like you say, the plug plants to grow on. We do keep, you know, obviously reiterating that you've got to keep the frost off them. They do need growing on before you do anything much with them, but they have started appearing.
Absolutely.
And we will get all those sort of things in quantity very, very soon, I'm sure.
A very wise woman once told me to go to your garden centre every single month, and then if you buy something that's in flower every month, you're guaranteed to, when you plant it in your garden, have flowers every month in your garden. But it's the same thing with things like bedding. When it comes into the garden centre, that's when you know is the right time to start buying it. And don't be tempted just to leave it in its little plugs if you do buy them in small plugs, because that can really stunt the growth later in the season. So as soon as you get them, if you have the space, pot them up into something bigger and let those roots fill the incrementally. I wouldn't go straight into an absolutely massive area, because that can be quite shocking for plants actually in a big bit of soil, and can waste your compost. So a slightly bigger pot, and then a slightly bigger pot again, and then it will be ready and strong and big and bushy when you plant it out in the garden.
And you will then get that instant result that it sounds like he really wants.
Absolutely.
And we've got all those sort of things in. So we've got all the seed trays and the peat pots and all the other little things that will grow those things on to that point with no problem. Someone's asked about rose bushes. Do I need to prune my rose bushes? And what is the best pot to put them in if you don't have space in the ground?
Okay. Yes, definitely do prune your rose bushes. They respond very well from pruning, but they respond very badly from being left is the main thing. They can become a real tangly mess, and especially if they're thorny, that can be quite overwhelming to deal with if they get out of control. So end of winter, early spring is the best time to prune them. You can prune them in the autumn when they finish flowering if you want to, but their main prune would be early spring, I would say. And it's quite an art form, but I think if you get pruning roses down, you can prune anything. So I love pruning roses because it's a really good training ground just to get your eye in for any kind of pruning. So what you're looking for is an open habit, no crossing branches, no diseased branches. Roses are quite prone to different kinds of fungal diseases. So remove anything that looks like it might be a bit dodgy, first and foremost. And then secondly, approach anything that's crossing. So if the branches look like this, that's not going to be healthy. It will cause rubbing and congestion. You want good airflow through. So have a look at those 2 branches, follow them with your eye back to the stem, and work out which of those 2 is healthier, stronger, and going to give you a better shape, and then remove the other one. So once all the crossing branches are gone, you should have a fairly all right shape, but then you can take the whole thing down. I wouldn't take it too far, depending on what kind of rose you have, but maybe taking about 1/3 of the height off it, and any kind of spent flower heads or rose hips that you may have on there. And always cut to an outward facing bud. So you'll see on the stem the little sort of the nodes, which is the lines across the stem, and there'll be a little swollen, usually red area on a rose. That will be on one side or the other, and that's the bud. So you always pick the one that's facing the direction that you want the rose to grow in, which should be outward facing, or according to the shape of the rose. And once you've got it, it sounds very complicated, but once you've got it and plenty of practice, you will be able to prune anything and see that shape, and you'll very quickly get your eye into how a shrub should look when it's been finished pruning. And in terms of growing it in a pot, the bigger the better, I would say. With a rose, they're quite hungry, they're quite prone to disease, and if they're weakened, they can be more prone to things like black spots. So as big a pot as you can fit. It doesn't have to be enormous, but as long as there's plenty of room for the roots to grow into. And keep replenishing that compost and feed it quite regularly. A mulch of things like manure on the top will just give it that extra boost and a bit of extra strength. They are fairly tough plants, but they can live for many, many years very, very unhappily, and they will still survive, but they are at their best when they're given a bit of mollycoddling, and they look incredible.
Yeah, they're very forgiving, aren't they?
Yeah,
but
that's the word.
Yeah, but you often see them and you think that's not a happy rose.
But they can go. I was given a rose when I was an apprentice, that they were redoing the whole of our bowling green area, which was planted with very formal rose beds along the edges. We ripped all of the formal planting out and planted huge tropical borders along the edges instead. And those roses, which are called barcarolle, are beautiful, deep red, but heavily scented rose. And I loved them. And my boss let me have them because he was going to throw them away. And they sat in my mum's garden for that whole time, very unhappily. And that was when I was an apprentice, so 13, 14 years ago. And I moved one last year onto my allotment where it's in the sun. And I've given it loads of manure every winter, and having sulked for nearly 15 years, it is now glorious and beautiful and big and bushy, and it's put on about twice as much growth as it had. So they can sulk and sulk and sulk and still survive, and you can move them multiple times and they will survive. So they are forgiving, but they like a bit extra.
Yeah, and I bet it smells wonderful.
Oh, it smells amazing.
Roses are the best.
I know that I always think, what's the point of a rose unless it has a scent? There's nothing like it. So they are amazing.
That's lovely. And of course, we've got a good selection of roses in at the moment, including some well-scented ones. And pots, not a problem. We've got a big choice of pots. And we always say what you're saying, bigger the better.
Yeah.
Makes life easier, doesn't it? And
also a nice one. Like people always buy a pot just because it's there and it's the right size. Pick one you like, because that can be a real statement. Don't just get like a plastic one that does the job. Spend the money, get a really nice pot that you love, and it will really it will elevate your garden, especially if you don't have any ground space. If you just have a courtyard and you only have pots, make them really nice pots. You can get some amazing pots now. There's a huge range of them. And
you're going to have that pot for years and years. I've got pots I've maybe had for 30 years and they're still
really
growing.
Yeah, that's it, and it doesn't matter because obviously fashions change. I remember in the 90s, everyone talked about those blue glazed pots. My mum's garden is still full of them, but they still look lovely. It doesn't matter what fashions do, when they're full of greenery. I just think pots, spend the money on them. I love a good pot.
Absolutely. So this next one's an intriguing one because they've sent a picture. So I don't know whether you can see that. If I hold that up, is that?
Yes.
Is that visible? So
I can see that.
It's like
there's a lawn with.
That's right, with a play area at the back.
Yeah.
And a sort of sitting area in the foreground. And basically, they've said we've got a play area at the end of the garden. There's some low sleepers, and she wants to plant a row of plants in front of it to just zone it off, not to hide it, I don't think.
I see. Okay.
But she's no idea what to plant, and she's thinking maybe of grasses with knee-high plants. Any advice? West-facing garden, so it's going to be warm.
Okay, nice. Well, there's so much scope there, isn't there? You could do
Yeah.
anything. I mean, I like a lawn, but I much more appreciate a garden that's full of flowers and produce and anything that's useful for pollinators and things. So if it were me, I'd probably be tempted to make that bed quite generous and really fill it. And in terms of what she fills it with, it sounds like she quite likes the prairie style, which I would say would be really good there, because you get a kind of screening without a solid blocking, so you can still see the children when they're presumably bouncing on the trampoline and make sure that they're safe, but you definitely would obscure that view with tall grasses. So I would put things like miscanthus. There's loads of lovely tall miscanthus. Morning light is a really beautiful one. Zabrinus is another, a bit taller if you're in a cool enough, a kind of mild enough place that it wouldn't get killed off by a frost. But there are loads of grasses. Picking which ones is tough. You want tough grasses, so things like Calamagrostis would probably be good. Molinia would be good. So many. Pennisetum, macrorum is quite a lovely one with a very fine, tall feather, rather than you get the very delicate ones like ham elm, and they're a little bit more delicate. So if there's going to be footballs kicked at them or anything like that, then they might not be very grateful. But the macrorum I would recommend is a nice, big, bulky, strong grass that gives that height. There's also Stipa giganteum that might look amazing there with the especially setting sun catching those really tall golden flower heads. So many grasses to pick from. It's just a case of going to the garden centre and speaking to somebody and asking some advice about how big they get and where they'd like to be. But you shouldn't have any problem in terms of aspect. They should all be fairly happy there. And then flowers in amongst them. The world is your oyster. There are so many. And the classic with prairies would be things like that create that lovely big daisy shape. So rudbeckias, echinaceas, heleniums, even things like chamomile would give that lovely daisy shaped flower at the bottom. But you could pick anything that you liked. Gaura is beautiful with grasses, very tall, slender, white flowers or pink flowers. Things like astrantia, lovely papery, tough flowers. So many. I could just go on and on and on. You have an amazing space there and amazing potential to really create something beautiful. Just from looking at the picture, I'd also think about connecting it to that border that's going along the side, so that you have a little bit of continuity between those two spaces to really create a beautiful arrangement, really. So if you have grasses just in the middle and then it ends at the bed on the side, that might look a bit odd. So just maybe putting a few grasses along the side as well would just tie those two areas in together. But just go to a garden centre and get some inspiration. There is so much you could do with that space. It sounds like a really fun project.
Yeah, it sounds fun, doesn't it? And get the kids involved as well, because they often love
true.
Yeah,
I mean, if they're growing things they could sort of use, or if they're growing things, kids often really respond well to things they can eat or things that insects and wildlife enjoy.
Wildlife, definitely.
So if you get the kids to maybe make some insect houses and then pick some wildlife friendly plants that they can put in that bed, they will have a vested interest in not destroying the bed as they jump over it to get to the play area. So that could be quite a nice thing to do.
Yes, absolutely. So we have those grasses that you're talking about. Those are coming in soon. We haven't got a lot of the taller stuff in yet. It's mainly shorter stuff, but it will be with us probably within 3 or 4 weeks. And I totally get what you're saying. There's so much choice with the perennials that you can intersperse with that. And those are starting to be available. But it's early days.
Thinking about with the daisy flowers and the prairie schemes and the children, a really lovely thing that looks stunning in amongst grasses is chocolate cosmos. It's not fully hardy, but if you protect it or bring it in, then it can last for a few years. And the flowers have that lovely daisy-like shape, but they're a really, really deep red, and so they look, especially with steeper tenuissima, that's a really lovely combination, but they smell like chocolate. So if you want the kids to get involved with that space, I imagine the kids would absolutely love having that in the border as well. So that could be a nice one.
Absolutely, and that should be with us later on this season. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
So someone's asked about the weather and mentioned that there's still frost in the morning, and they're saying, is it too early to plant out summer bulbs?
I would say we're just coming into the season to start thinking about that now. The main problem with summer bulb planting too early would be the wet. So we've had, I know it's been a very mixed winter. Here in the southeast, we had rain basically from the 1st of January until a few weeks ago. So the ground has been absolutely saturated. But it's just beginning to dry now. So depending where you are in the country, you'll have different conditions, and I would say that the biggest threat to a lot of summer bulbs is rotting off from the damp rather than from the cold. So if you have a very well drained soil, or a very well drained kind of additions to your soil, lots of gravel that you've added, then you should be all right to plant them anytime from now, really. But if you have very wet areas, then wait until it's dried out a little bit. That's the key thing, I would think, with that.
Sure. So we've got dahlias and lilies and things like that. And yeah, it is because they're fleshy, aren't they? Things like particularly the lilies, and therefore prone to rotting.
Absolutely.
So that's something that's great that he could get on with that now. A very open-ended question. Best plants for shaded areas that will provide colour all year round.
Ooh. Well, we mentioned some earlier on with the ground cover. But there are a lot, actually, when you start thinking about it. I don't know how big the area that you have is, or how many plants you're looking to get.
They've not.
I would say no. If you want colour all year in a shaded area, you're not going to be looking at just one plant. It will be a combination of different plants that have different seasons. So I would think first and foremost, when you're planning the area, about stem colour, because that's something that will give you a big impact. And you won't get as many flowers in shady areas as you will foliage and stem. So that's the first thing to think about. So things like bamboos, loads of different coloured stem bamboo, golden bamboo, black bamboo, they look amazing. But if you're a little bit nervous of bamboo, which I know lots of people are, because they can spread quite quickly, then things like cornus are beautiful. You'll get really bright stems in the winter. So midwinter fire grows really nicely in a shady area, or just the standard alba, and you can get silver ones, purple ones, red ones. So there's a whole range of different colours you can have with cornus, and they look beautiful. But if the space is slightly smaller, or you don't want to go for a big shrub, then I would maybe think about things like rubus, which is the same genus as blackberries, but you can get some lovely ornamental rubus that have amazing stem colours. So rubus coburnianus is the classic one, and you can get golden forms of that as well with golden foliage. So that would be my first thing to think of, would be stem colour. And then move on to flower or foliage colour. But like I said, it would probably be more foliage than flower. Some classics that I always go to is epimedium for shady areas, because they have beautiful, almost blood red leaves, green and red in combination. And either kind of yellowy flowers or pink flowers, depending. They're very small flowers, but they are really beautiful plants, very lovely mounds that the foliage forms. And then also things like heuchera are really good for shade. They're not the most long-lived perennials, and they can get a little bit leggy, so you maybe want to replace them every few years. But you can get them again in all different shades. You can get yellow ones, red ones, purple ones, green ones, a whole range of different colours of foliage, which look really beautiful. Euphorbia is a really good plant for shade, especially the robii, which is a really bright zingy colour. So shades of green and yellow. So it's not kind of a bright different colour but it is really zingy and beautiful. And just, I think, not underestimating green as a colour when you have a shady area. People often, when they think of they want colour, they think of bright colours, reds and yellows and purples. And in shade, you just don't get that quite as much. But green as a colour is a beautiful and incredible addition to the garden. You know, if people, I often find if people go too much for flower colour and ignore the greenery, it can be quite a confused and messy scheme. Having a really lovely, really cohesive green backdrop allows you then to add bits of colour pop here and there where you need them. But get the green right. So lots of ferns and lots of, again, the things I mentioned earlier with the ground cover, so pachysandra, gallium, vinca with blue flowers again. So get that backdrop of green really good, and then you can use things like bedding to add flower if you desperately want it.
Yeah.
But it's a tough ask for plants to have bright flowers in very, very shady areas. What you would find though is a lot of scented flowers, so things like sarcococca, the Christmas box, do really, really well in shade, and some daphnes as well will cope quite well with it, and they'll give amazing scent. So you won't have the bright colour, but you'll have an amazing smell in that area, which is kind of more worthwhile. And that's just an adaptation of shade loving plants. They don't tend to have big flowers because the pollinators can't really see them as easily. So in the sunlight, plants get really big flowers, and in the shade they get very highly scented but much smaller flowers. And just exploit that, you know, enjoy it.
Yeah, and you've got all those fantastic evergreens, haven't you, that are quite happy in the shade.
Completely.
So we've got a massive choice of evergreens at the moment. Many of the ones you've mentioned, like euphorbia and the heuchera, we've got plenty of that to choose from at the moment. And yeah, I mean, you can have any colour you want really in things like heuchera, can't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I get overwhelmed when I start trying to buy them.
New ones every year, isn't there?
Yeah, I know.
That looks very like, you know, another variety, but there's always one to, tempt you.
Yeah, which one to get, that's the problem.
It's what? Which one? Oh, yes.
Which one, you know, there's just so many of them. It's sort of like,
narrow it down. Right, so then the next one is they've got a trellis on a fence that they want to put plants on. It's in full sun. Any recommendations? Again, massive choice.
Again, yeah, there's so much you can do with this. It depends what you're into as a gardener. My natural instinct would always be to go straight for edibles. And there are quite a few really amazing edible climbers that you can get. So grape is the obvious one. Loads of different kinds of grape, and the UK climate is now getting much more warm. And so there are some tougher grapes that are being bred, so you can get grapes that will withstand a slightly tougher climate. But if you have a fence, that is often actually a really good place for a grape, because basically the poorer the soil, the happier the grape will be. So at the bottom of a fence, that's quite a tough place for a lot of plants to grow, because there's often a rain shadow, and it will kind of be a quite good thing that will be quite forgiving. But that's not the only thing. Kiwi, I love kiwi, depending how big a space you have, but they're beautiful tropical looking plants. So Actinidia chinensis is just a stunning climate. It gets very big, so only if you have a fair amount of room on your trellis, but that would be beautiful. Things like hops as well, really, really great climbers. Herbaceous, so you cut them back to the ground every year, but then they'll throw up 12 feet of growth in a year, and they're really great for things like butterflies as well. So if you're into edibles, they're your options there. But there are so many other things you could do in a sunny on a sunny trellis. Things like clematis would be fantastic if you just want loads and loads of flower, because they need a really sunny top, a bit of a shady bottom if you can. So if the bottom is in sun too, then maybe some rocks or pots or other plants around the base, just to give a bit of protection from the base of the clematis, and plant it nice and deeply. But a clematis will really thank you for sun. Roses, as we already spoke about, loads of scented roses and loads of scented climbers generally, so jasmine or Chacalisburnum, all amazing scented climbers. Loads of different flowers, or you can get some annuals. There's some lovely annual climbers, so things like Ipomoea, the morning glory, will be beautiful up a trellis. So I mean, there's so much to choose from there. Have fun with it. enjoy it and really think about something that you love, or put a combination of different ones in so you have flowers at different times of the year. Clematis and rose is a really lovely combination that can grow well together. But so much choice.
I know it's nice to have that choice, isn't it? And those things are coming in. We've got a full range of roses in. We're still waiting for some of the climbers. They always seem to come on stream a little bit later. But yeah, we'll have all those things that you've mentioned. And it's fun, isn't it? You know, and exploit it because it's a nice warm position.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the dream, isn't it? People often have the most trouble with, I mean, as you know, a lot of these questions are about shade plants because that's really tough. But most plants really enjoy being in the sun. So yeah, you've got a lot of scope there.
Yeah. Well, let's hope he enjoys himself then. That's up. What is the best way to keep your lawn looking good when you have 2 dogs who love to continually churn it up?
Oh, I don't know that one. I have the same problem myself. I don't know about his dogs, but my dog seems to always just pick the same spot to dig in. One right in the middle of the lawn, and luckily one right underneath a shrub, so it's kind of fine. But there are some plants that are a little bit tougher than others in terms of grasses. So often the female dogs weeing on the lawn will create a lot of damage to lawns. But more natural grasses are less prone to being damaged by that than the kind of high quality turf grasses that you might get on like a green or something like that. So if you're a bit less fussy about the kinds of grasses that you have, that will stand you in good stead to be a little more resilient to dogs digging. I mean, it makes sense as well, you know, the roots are a bit tougher. These really fine fescues are beautiful, but they are very delicate. So yeah, a tough grass will be a lot more resistant to digging and dog urine. But you could kind of think outside of a lawn and go for other species in your grass. So things like clover are really resistant to, or a lot tougher when it comes to being walked on or dogs digging and things like that. And also really, really good for bees and completely non-toxic and non-stingy. So if you're going to go down the wildflower, slightly tougher plant route and get rid of some of your grasses, do think about that with dogs. Are they going to be stung by the plants you're putting down? Things like thistles and stingy nettles may not be appealing. Having said that, you could exploit that if you have an area of say border that you're really trying to protect. You could plant some thistles or things through the lawn that will be really good for pollinators and for insects, but your dogs will be really resistant to walking over that little area. I wouldn't do it on the whole lawn because it just seems really cruel on the dog, but you could designate areas where it's just grass and therefore it's okay for the dog to dig in, and areas that you want to keep other things protected and put some other things that will put the dogs off in the lawn. But yeah, definitely think about not just grass but other wildflowers that are non-toxic for dogs that you could add to it, just to have a bit of a tougher root system.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I'm guessing if you've got dogs, you're not perhaps going to be too precious about, you know, the lawn.
No, I think not. I mean, for me, I'm much more precious about my borders than about the grass. The grass is sort of fair game for the dogs, and they don't wreck it too much. But with your borders, I've found, depending how bright your dog is, I'm staying with my mum at the moment, and she has a really clever dog, but my dog's quite stupid, so it's really good because I could just put canes, plant canes. You can get some lovely hoops, especially the quartz and steel ones are just beautiful, that you can put in front of the borders, and they create a beautiful little low fence that looks lovely and supports the plants as well, so they don't flop onto the lawn, but also keeps my dog out but not my mum's dog out. But if you have a nicely dopey dog like like mine, that's a really good way of protecting your plants as well, with just clever use of stakes and canes.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And we do have things like that in iron, and also, as you say, in bamboo. And those they look nice. You're not offended by them, and they're doing a practical job as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Brilliant. Last one. I want colour and height next to my front door, but it doesn't get much sunlight. What would you recommend? And shall it be planted in the ground or in a pot?
Okay. Again, quite a lot that you could do. If you were able to fix a trellis to the wall, you could put climbers there. There are some shade-loving climbers like the hydrangea petiolaris that we mentioned before. That would be quite happy there. But if it were me, I would probably go for something a bit more formal and maybe put a pot, either one on one side or, if you can, one on each side of the front door, and plant something in it like a Italian cypress, Compressus sempervirens, which is lovely and tall and thin, so it won't encroach on your entrance into the door at all, but will give you a pretty grand and green bit of height. And then maybe underplant that with some grasses that are shade tolerant. So things like, I would probably go for a Hakanakloa, which is a beautiful Japanesey looking, just very, very green mound of grass that flops and is really stunning. A lot of people would go for Ophiopogon, which is another grass which is black. I don't personally like it at all. I find it really hard in a scheme, but I have seen it a couple of times used with some violas or some other low growing, delicate little plants that do look really nice, but it's a tough one. If you're a confident garden designer, go for the Ophiopogon. If you're a bit less certain, then maybe the Hakanakloa, just to really soften the edges of the pot. But also things like Muhlenbeckia would look amazing in that sort of area. So and that has beautiful, tiny little, very glossy leaves and sort of hangs over the edges of pots and really softens things. So I wouldn't go for anything too flowery, unless it was probably bedding that you would replace each year, because it'll be a tough ask for anything flowery to survive. But a beautiful upright conifer, particularly the Italian cypress that stays really narrow with some softening of underplanting, would be really, I think, quite a grand entrance home every time you come in. So that's what I would do.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we would also probably suggest topiary, because we sell a lot of that, and that can look really smart outside of front door. And like you said with the cypress, it has that advantage of never getting too broad, so it's not impeding your entrance to the house. So yeah, that's something I think we'd recommend, certainly.
I mean, you can have real fun with that, couldn't you? If you have ground space and a pot, and they're both options, then you could underplant things like Mind Your Own Business in the ground beneath, and then have a pot on top, and then create almost like an Italianate, as if it's been there for hundreds of years, little relic of some lovely formal pot. I mean, you could really have fun and make that really stunning, because I think there's a big movement to get people's front gardens up and growing again, with people who are lucky enough to have front gardens. That obviously they've been paved over a lot in the past, and now people are thinking more about using those spaces. And that entrance home, when you come in the door after a day's work, is so important. And if you have something that's really, welcoming, there's nothing better, really, is there?
It's the focal point, isn't it? So it's the first thing you see, and it's probably the most important thing you see when you walk up to a house. It defines the house, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It gives an impression to people walking past, but it also gives you that calm when you walk back in the front door. A little bit of greenery as you come in, just to welcome you home, is such a lovely thing for yourself.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. That's the end of the list.
Well, I hope everyone's questions were answered enough.
Brilliant. I mean, there were all the sort of answers we would have liked to have given. They were they were the sort of answers that I think our customers would have loved. Yeah, thank you for that, Frances.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, and good luck with all your festivities.
Thanks a lot. See you soon.
All right. Take care. Bye. Bye.